Welcome to the Game of Life podcast, where we bring you inspiring softball stories, insightful tips from coaches and players, and explore how the game transcends its boundaries to become a metaphor for life. Whether you're a sports enthusiast, a casual fan, or someone just looking for inspiration, you're in for a treat. We'll unravel the tales that go beyond the scoreboard. Discover how perseverance and hard work on the field translates into resilience in your daily challenges. Learn about teamwork, leadership, and the unwavering spirit that fuels success, not just in sports, but in the game of life. We've been waiting for this episode for a while, and I laughed. There was nothing to wait on. It was just the fact we'd cross paths all the time, and neither of us would reach out. It's just the way it goes. But to be fair, it was softball season for what Quincy does, and you know, I've had projects going on, and Allie was traveling with work. So now we're back, and I'd like to introduce Quincy Lewis. Before I say too much, we don't do a lot with bios and intros by me. We just wanted to come right from you. Tell us about yourself. Go back as far as you want, and when you stop talking, we'll start asking questions.
Oh boy, no pressure.
Yeah.
So I am a Corning, New York native originally. I went to Corning West and played travel ball locally for the Lady Bandits, and then transitioned to the New Jersey Nightmare as I got a little bit older. And then attended college at CW Post and Shippensburg University, played ball both places. Went to school to be a teacher and realized about 3 weeks before graduation, teaching was not for me. So in panic mode, literally called my mom and she was like, "What are you doing with your life? Oh my gosh." So ended up jumping into college coaching and really combining softball and teaching and loved that aspect of it. Coached all three divisions, bounced around a little bit. Really couldn't find kind of where I fit into college coaching, division wise, what I wanted out of it. And during COVID, I got super involved in working with teams. And I remember calling all my travel ball friends and I'm like, "Hey, I'm so bored. Like, let me talk to your kids. Let me help them. Like, how can I really ease some of the stress of it all?" And realize that's really where I belong in life, which was a little crazy to think of. So now I do that full time and own Diamond Dynamics softball and work with athletes and families and teams and really use my college coaching experience to help educate families and all of that, which has been really fun. So
Is it difficult? I mean, I've been through it with my daughters, and when you're a parent, you don't know what you're doing. Because you get one shot at it. And mine were supposed to be golfers. I tell Ellie that all the time. What a big disappointment she is.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh, is it hard to lead people along when there's so much emotion attached to it? And I say lead because you're not trying to push, you're not trying to persuade, you're just trying to help people through their journey. But how hard is that, or what are the challenges involved with that?
yeah, so I think for me, it's more about helping families navigate their own emotions. Because I'm not, in their homes and having those conversations. And, there are, of course, kids that I'm overly attached to that I've had since seventh, eighth grade and things like that. But I'm more the person where it's like they're arguing in the kitchen making dinner and they're like, "Well, we're just going to call Quincy and she's just going to referee for us." So that's more my role, which is fun. It was really hard at the beginning to like take my opinions out of it, because there are college coaches I'm very close with, just like there are travel ball coaches I'm close with. And, I joke that I try and be Switzerland and stay in the middle. And, I'm not really associated with any specific high school or travel ball organization. I work with everybody. So I really try and present facts to families and say, "Hey, this is what I know about this program. This is what I know about these people. I can reach out to other people and get other opinions for you if you want." But I really try and stay as neutral as possible. I am not neutral with my husband at home always, but so he's also a former college coach. He coached volleyball, so he takes the brunt of that sometimes. But yeah, I try and kind of be that like neutral, little bit of voice of reason and kind of let the families ride the roller coaster a little bit.
Yeah. So going back to your journey you were talking about a little bit. So right around when you were finishing up college, I just like asking this question. What do you love about softball, like about this game that made you want to dive into it full time? Because I think when kids are getting recruited, right, that's the number one thing is they have to love it. And I'm sure you talk to kids about that. But I'm just curious your answer to that question.
I think for me, it's softball is so different than so many other sports. So I compare it to volleyball a lot just because that's what my husband coached. And, for him, like if his team is bigger and stronger, he's probably going to win. Whereas for us, that's not how softball works. Like you can turn on a softball game and see, two teams of 25 kids. They're all different heights, they're all different sizes, they've all got different strengths. Like there is literally a place for everybody in our sport. And I don't think every single sport has that. And just the diversity of, I even think of the JMU third baseman a couple of years ago who was, 5 foot nothing and was playing on this national stage. Like you don't see that always in other sports. And just that there's really a place for everybody.
Yeah.
That's a great point because in most sports you're trying to contain the best athlete. Like I coached high school volleyball for 8 years, and the best player is going to get X amount of kill attempts and X amount of digs and X amount. But in softball, the other best player might be up 3, 4 times, right? That's it. And it's a complete team effort. And it's a complete team effort based on failure. I mean, think about it. That's what's so crazy about this game. We're celebrating successes because we didn't fail as much sometimes. So I I love what you're saying.
Yeah, agreed. So one question, since I've entered coaching this past year, I see a lot of times when kids talk about college, they have a hard time being honest with themselves. So they might think, I see you nodding, but they may think they know what they want or they know what their parents want. So what's your advice kind of in that realm for kids just who need to be honest with themselves, like what they want?
Yeah, so I think it really starts with who are the people that you surround yourself with? And are those people going to be honest with you to help you be honest with yourself? We're seeing a lot right now with like travel ball and just softball in general. Like people are making a lot of money in it,
Yeah.
which can be good. It can also be bad. And I personally am seeing a lot of lesson instructors saying, "Oh, well, you have a D1 swing, and oh, you can play D1, and you can do this." Like you need those people to be able to sit down with you and have really honest, hard conversations.
Yeah.
I think it really starts with kind of who's in that inner circle support system as you're going through the process. And it also kind of as you finish, the only person whose opinion really matters is the college coach because they're the ones saying yes or no. And I think families get all of this advice, right, from social media and travel ball and high school. And, these parents at games are asking every other parent, how did you get recruited? How did you do this? Well, their kid might have been an engineering major wanting to go to California, and your kid might be an education major who wants to stay within an hour from home. Like, those are
Yeah.
two totally different processes to really go through. And I tell our kids, I'm like, hey, my opinion doesn't even matter because
Yeah.
some of my kids end up at schools where I'm like, whoa, like I never saw that happening. Or
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, like you grew so much junior year, like you flourished. This is amazing, good for you. And if you're an athlete, and I look at 25s and 26s right now, if you have, one Division 1 offer, 6 Division 2 offers, and a bunch of Division 3 interest, you're probably a D2 kid because that's what the college coaches are telling you are. And that piece of it too. And I had a conversation with a high school coach a little bit ago, and she was like, "Well, I know this kid is better than this kid who's on this college roster." And I was like, "How do you know that? Like, how does that work as somebody who's not at practice every day for that college team? You're not at every game. You don't know the philosophy of the coaches. You don't know what they're looking for in an athlete." So there are so many people that are giving all of this advice, and that self reflection is really hard, and
Yeah.
that being because there's so much noise around kids right now. And I have families that joke with me and they're like, "You're kind of negative sometimes." And I'm like, because everything around them is telling them they're this, they're that, they're amazing. There's this false sense of, oh, I won at this local tournament with 20 teams and I was the best pitcher at this tournament, so I'm a D1 athlete. When
Right.
in reality, you go to, a national level showcase and that kid probably won't even make a roster there. Um,
Right. And I think sometimes you need to be honest because a lot of kids too, they're chasing D1, but they don't realize when you get there, you might sit for not a game, a year or two. And they think they're going to be okay with that. But it's really different when you're living it day in and day out, right? You say, oh, I just got to get there and then it'll all be okay. And some kids are okay with that challenge. Like my journey personally, I wasn't much of a role player my first few years, but I just loved being there and being a part of it. But I had friends and teammates who wanted to start right away. And there's no right or wrong choice, but there's a right choice for you, I think, depending on what your answers to those questions are.
Absolutely. And are you making the choice for you, or are you making the choice for the social media post and the signing ceremony? And what really
Yeah.
matters in the long run?
Yeah.
So I talk about that a lot as a high school coach and having girls that played in high school and college and travel. Our news in our local town that we live in treats our kids like it's ESPN and it coaches too. I mean, there's radio broadcasts and they get quoted after games and it's great. But I think sometimes it puts us in the wrong spot of, I don't want to say how good we are, but how special we are. And so the news is a big deal, the signing's a big deal, and then a year later, no one remembers where you even went. And if you're not prepared for that, that's super difficult. And I wanted to bring that up because I heard you both talk about it. Do you find when you ask students like, okay, or students, softball players, clients, now you realize if you go here, you might sit for a little while. Do you feel most are okay with that, or do they just think, no, the shortstop's a senior and leaving? I'm a shortstop, so I'll probably be the shortstop next year, not realizing there's three other shortstops there fighting for the spot. So I don't even really know what I just asked you, but go ahead and spin off that.
Yeah, so I think the kids and the families, the earlier they get realistic, the better their overall experience is. And I have 20 to 25 families that I've had conversations with in the last month that are still chasing D1 schools. And those D1s are really almost completely done recruiting 2025s unless they're just waiting on a yes, they're wrapping things up. And it really depends on how realistic the family is. I see a lot of when kids get to school, and I was this kid, like I was laughing a little bit as you were like, oh, the local meet, like I was that kid that felt
Right.
like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be an All-American. I'm going to be in the SEC. Like, I was that pitcher locally for Corning. And I remember coming home after my freshman year and running into one of the reporters in the grocery store at Wegmans. And he was like, yeah, I was surprised you didn't play more this year. And I was like, oh, that was blunt. Okay. And then I was like, do you know how hard it actually was? Like, do you know how hard, like, having six pitchers and being a freshman and adjusting to new pitch calling and I just think sometimes if you're not in it consistently, you don't realize what it's really like, in that piece of it. And I think looking at the kids who are able to really look at, okay, like, this is what these kids can do at this level. Can I do that at this level? And we see the problem coming in as they can do it at the level of travel ball in high school they're playing at. They don't realize by watching the game on TV how much faster, stronger, better those kids truly are. And I think that's where we see a lot of that disconnect is we don't have kids watching enough live softball anymore.
Yeah.
Or the live softball they're watching is other teams at the tournament that they're at. They're not watching next level live softball. Because even on TV, it looks a little bit slower than it does live.
I
And I'm
agree.
a big believer in those middle school kids, like, get out and go watch ball. Every chance you get. Like, those fall games, get out and go watch them.
Or even, I think that's one of the important things about traveling outside your local area to play in tournaments. Like, there are a lot of other kids out there doing exactly what you do. So getting out of the pond that you're in and going to explore other places just to be like, wow, okay, that's what I'm up against. If I really want to play D1, D2, D3, any level, really, what makes me special compared to those girls I just played from New Jersey? Not just, oh, I'm the best in this hour radius. So that means that colleges are going to want me. So I think that perspective piece is huge too, just knowing how many girls like truly play softball too.
Absolutely.
You know, I get we were lucky as parents that were both educators and daughters that played on the same travel team most of the time. Traveling wasn't a big deal. It was just like fun vacations for us. And it's not that way for everybody. But regardless of where they went and what they did, I think what gained the biggest perspective for me is when we're in an airplane flying. Well, not often. We drove to Colorado, I think, four times.
Oof.
Get me started on
Oh,
Nonstop. But anyways, I'm flying and on a clear day, this is I look at softball fields and golf courses when the plane takes off and lands. And after a while, it's like softball complex, baseball complex. You don't like what you're doing in your community is literally probably in the tens of thousands everywhere else. And at that point, I'm like, wow, I think my kids are pretty good, but how many other pretty good kids are out there? And no matter where you land or what you end up doing, I think it helps make you realize whatever it is you decide is very special.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
I think kids either have one of two reactions to that. It like scares them away a little bit, or it kicks them into gear, like, oh, I really want this. I better start working my butt off to actually get it.
Absolutely. I just had that conversation with a college coach friend the other day, and he was like, I purposely send and like put out into the world like the hardest workouts my kids are doing, the hardest drills. Like, I put out all of this video and content, not because I'm trying to recruit kids, but because I'm trying to make the wrong kids not want to play for me. And I
Hmm.
was like, that's kind of brilliant. Like,
Yeah.
because you put out in the world exactly who you are and what you expect of your kids, and there are going to be a lot of kids that go, ooh, that's too hard for me. That's not what I want to do.
Hmm. Yeah.
I, I got a couple. Well, I feel like questions I'm going to tee up for you because I already know the answer, but I think it's important. First of all, tell us about your podcast before I start asking, because I've listened to a bunch of your episodes and I have a lot of favorites. So tell us about the podcast before we go on.
I love to podcast, which was not something I thought I was gonna like. It started out as like a baby blog back in like 2012 when I was in high school. And I ended up I have so many conversations with the families in our program, and I'm having the same conversation so many times. And I got to the point where I was like, how many kids are scared to ask these questions? And how many kids are like just overwhelmed? And I just kind of got on and started talking. And I want kids to kind of feel like what we're doing right now. Like, if a kid in a family is listening to this on the way to a tournament, they're going to feel like we're just sitting in the car next to them, and make them feel like, hey, these people have been where you are, or these are experts in the field that want you to succeed. And there's so much noise, and I keep coming back to that of noise, and there are so many people out there right now that are giving recruiting advice that are like football, basketball people that don't even understand our world and the rules,
Yes.
and so I try and bring on, all sorts of different professionals. I get on sometimes on my own and spit off different things. Like, I think I did an episode a little bit ago that was like how I tackled like showcase season as a college coach, and literally took listeners through like, this is how I started my summer. This is how I chose who to go look at. This is how I said yes or no to kids. Because I'm kind of in a unique position now where I don't represent a college anymore. So I can be a little bit more blunt and be
Yeah.
like, hey, this is what worked and this is what college coaches are doing and that kind of stuff too. So it's been really fun.
That's awesome. That's cool. And
My,
then
oh,
I was
go
just
ahead,
gonna
Ellie.
say, yeah, spinning off that, I want to dive into or ask you a little bit about what steps you need to take to get recruited, right? So I think there's a lot of kids or some kids who think that they're gonna go play at a tournament, a coach is gonna walk by and see them get one hit, and that's it. That's how you're gonna get recruited. And I guess my question is, right, if I'm, let's say, a freshman and I think I want to play in college, what do I do to start? Because I think a lot of kids just get overwhelmed, so then they don't do really anything. And then next thing you know, they're a sophomore, junior, and then they're in a tough spot.
Yep, absolutely. And people like think I'm crazy when I talk about wanting to start working with kids when they're freshmen. And they're like, they're such babies. And I'm like, but that's really where it starts. And I think for freshmen, it's all about screwing up.
Yeah.
And people always laugh at me, but I'm like, when you start to put yourself out there and you start to figure out what you want a little bit and you start to communicate with coaches and go to camps, and like, they don't expect you to be good yet. They don't expect you to know what you're doing yet. Like, I sent one of our 2028s to a camp over the summer, and she called me afterwards almost in tears. And she was like, Quincy, I sucked. Like, what do I do? And I was like, you go back, because
Yeah.
that coach is just excited that you were there and you're learning how to do this process. So we literally wrote down like what went well, what didn't, how she's going to communicate with coaches differently next time. Because at the end of the day, she's a 2028. That coach isn't going to remember her. That coach is looking at the 26s and 27s at camp.
Good
So
point.
if that kid can make all of her mistakes as a freshman and become that super confident sophomore, junior, that's where that kid gets recruited more likely. And I think putting yourself out there And our freshmen are doing a lot of the same things that our sophomores and juniors are doing, but they're doing it with a different purpose. Like I send kids to camp not for specific schools as freshmen, but to learn how to camp and to figure out how do I connect with this coach when there are 40 other kids here and things like that. And I can actually send you guys, I have like a college planning checklist thing I'll send you to throw in the show notes that people can grab
Cool.
afterwards that kind of takes them through each year of what to focus on and things like that. So, but yeah, I think it's really, as a freshman, putting yourself out there and making a lot of mistakes and then also starting to figure out what you don't want. Because like we always ask kids, like, well, what do you want to major in? What do you want to do? What type of school do you like? They don't know. They've only been on like three campuses ever, and it's usually like Ohio State, Penn State, and Syracuse. Like those are
Yeah.
the three. They're like these are the three campuses I've been to because everybody goes to Ohio State for tournaments.
Yeah.
Everybody loves Happy Valley, and Syracuse is an easy one to get to in New York.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, if those are the three campuses they've been to, they don't really know what they want yet. So
Right.
it's okay, you're spending all this money to drive 8 hours from home to go to a tournament, take 3 hours on a Friday night and go drive through a bunch of campuses that you might not get to otherwise and start writing down this is what I like about this school, this is what I don't. And across the course of a year, you're going to start to see trends in that. Like, oh, I don't like the concrete jungle schools. Like, I need to be somewhere a little bit more in the suburbs. Like, I don't like the super spread out. I have to take a bus around campuses. I like something more compact. And that's kind of how kids and families should figure out what they would like, is more by crossing things off the list.
Yeah, I think that's actually really funny you brought that up because I think 2 days ago I was talking to a girl who was interested in playing in college, and I said, well, you need to sit down and just write out a list of what you want. Like, don't have your mom and dad there, just you with a list, pen and paper, old school. What do you think you want? Because the other flip side of that, I think, is when you start emailing coaches and a school emails you and you get super excited, but they only have one thing that was on your list. It's kind of a reality check for you too, because as much as that school's picking you, you're picking them to spend your next 4 years. So that kind of, I think, serves as a little like gut check when you kind of start having those conversations too.
Absolutely. It's funny. One of our older athletes that's been in my world for a long time, she just graduated college. She made the joke. She was like, "You literally taught me how to date."
Yeah.
Because of the way we connected with college coaches. And she was like, you taught me how to like date and figure out what I wanted out of a marriage and what I want out of my life. And I was like, you know what? Like that's basically what we did. You're right.
Yeah.
So I compare it to dating a lot with our high school kids. They all laugh at me and then they think about it later and they're like, like that's actually right.
Hilarious.
It's funny you say that though. I hope this doesn't get too serious, but we used to talk with Jen and Allie that it's that way with coaches. Like mental toughness sometimes isn't just powering through something that's a bad situation for you. And just like if you were in a relationship, it would be domestic abuse or something like that. And so, not to get too deep, but teaching them how to date through the college process, finding your fit. You talk about life skills. That's it right there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. I had a similar conversation with we were doing some video with one of our 2027s and I was like, hey, like I booked the field, we're doing it, Wednesday afternoon at this time. And she goes, well, I start school on Wednesday. And I was like, okay, like where was that when we had this conversation 3 days ago? And she goes, well, I told you 2 weeks ago that I start school on Wednesday. And I was like, wait a minute, there are like 70 of you guys, time out, and it's teaching them how to advocate for themselves. And because when you're on a roster of 25 in college, that coach isn't texting you every day, checking in on you. It's you have to go advocate for yourself and say, hey, I'm really struggling in my science class. How do I go find a tutor? Can you help me? Versus waiting into the last little bit. And there's so much of that piece of it too, of like I could talk about life skills forever and communicating. And, I just helped one of our older kids. She sent a personalized thank you note to a coach after a camp and she didn't know how to address the envelope. Like just the silly little life skills that I don't think of that as these kids graduate and go into school and become grown-ups are going to take them so much further in life.
Well, even you get to college and you're in a 400-person lecture now. The professor's not even going to know your name unless you make them know it. So being comfortable in those situations of just walking in somewhere and being like, hi, I'm so and so. Nice to meet you. Shake your hand. I look forward to your class. Like, I think it's missed on how many kids don't feel comfortable doing that. And to me, that is a life skill 101. Like, you need that, especially in college.
Absolutely. And I feel so old. I'm only 30 and I still feel old. And like I talk to the kids and I call them on the phone and they don't say anything when they pick up. And I'm like, guys, you have to say hello, and they don't talk on the phone. They just like sit there and wait for me to say something, or that kind of stuff. It's the life skills piece. And I tell our athletes, I'm like, I want you to make these mistakes with me. I want you to miss a Zoom call with me so we can talk about how to create a schedule and how to manage a planner or an app, or things like that. And the parents freak out. Like the mom calls me and she's like, I can't believe she missed a call, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, no, I want her to do that. And the parents are just mind blown by it. I'm like, they have to make those mistakes now so that they can be really productive college grown-ups.
Yeah.
That's a neat thing to pivot towards, the parent side of it, because if you don't let your child fail, I mean, you can probably see it with athletes and clients. If they're overprotective and doing everything for them, you're not going to really be able to help them in the process, are you?
Yep, absolutely. I do probably 90% of my communicating directly with the athlete.
Good.
And the parents are like CC'd on emails. The parents can check in with me whenever they want. But I really interact with our high school athletes the way I interacted with my college athletes. And then the little ones make those mistakes. And, as they get older, the parents are less and less involved. But that's a big red flag for college coaches too. Like if a parent comes in and really like runs the visit and runs the process and is sending all the emails and doing everything, like, you don't really know what the kid's capable of. And if mom and dad are running their schedule and grocery shopping and doing everything and doing all of that, when they get to college, they're going to struggle a lot making that adjustment, let alone struggling with adjusting to playing softball.
Yeah, I've heard college coaches say actually, like, we're recruiting you and your family because you're kind of an extension of that. So I think it's interesting that you say that too.
Yep, absolutely. And it's like a real thing. I mean, it happened to me. So I was a college coach. It was my first year as a head Division III coach. And at the end of the fall, I had pretty like blunt end of fall meetings with my athletes. And I was like, hey, if the season started tomorrow, this would be your role. Like you have the next however many months to make that not your role if you don't like it. And I had an athlete quit the next week, and she went into the athletic director because she was a pitcher and she didn't like my answer and that she was going to have to do a lot of work to get innings. And she went into the athletic director and told him that because I was changing X, Y, and Z with her pitching mechanics, she had to go in for shoulder surgery and that I needed to be fired.
Whoa.
And she quit because, yeah. And like everybody's like, oh, that doesn't happen in college. That like, because of how much it's happening in high school right now, and because kids are changing travel ball teams so much and families are just making their own teams, and it's really bleeding into college. And if a college coach makes you an offer, they're basically trusting you to feed their family, which we don't talk about it that way enough. That, if you're in their program, you have the ability to try and go get them fired. I can think of a couple college coaches I know that happened to, where they had a kid go in and work magic and suddenly that coach is no longer there. So, which is crazy.
Jeez, yeah, it's crazy. And I think it just goes to the preface of a lot of kids, nothing's ever their fault, right? It's always someone else's fault. And sometimes that can stem down from parents too. I mean, my dad and I talked about all the time growing up, if I had a bad game, it was no one's fault but mine. Like, balls in my court, literally. So even, let's say, for example, I had an 0-2 count and I struck out on what I thought was a bad pitch. Well, his response was, well, if you swung at the first two, you wouldn't have had an 0-2. Like, and
Yeah,
at the time, I'm like,
those were always fun conversations.
yeah,
I'm sure.
but honestly, that's what you need to hear. You're right. It wasn't my control. I'm going to take accountability for it, and I'm going to put my head down and get better. So, and I think that might just be where some of it stems from is they keep moving around, but they're the problem everywhere that they go because they don't want to change. They want their environment to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see it a lot just because, I mean, we have about 20 college freshmen every year. So that first semester, I'm like, you will stay until the end of the semester. You will not come home. Like, you will not quit. Like, we're figuring this out. But what I see a lot is the kid calls the parent, and the parent goes, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're not getting more innings in the scrimmage. Like, I can't believe the coach is saying this. I can't believe what's going on. You should be playing this position. Well, the parent's not at practice every day. They're not seeing what level of work that kid is putting in. They're not seeing that their freshman is, half as strong as this kid and doesn't swing as well and isn't as confident in their abilities. And right, they're not seeing their kid compared to every other kid on that roster. And so many times, just because a college coach recruits you doesn't mean they're recruiting you to be an impact player. And nobody likes to have that conversation either. And like as a college coach, I was always told you have to carry X amount of kids on your roster. I was at my smallest roster required was 17, my biggest was 26. So like your boss tells you how many kids you have to carry. And if I got to a certain point in the recruiting cycle where I was going to be under that number, I had to go find warm bodies and find butts that were going to fill seats so that I wasn't getting heat in my job. And that's not something that people like to talk about a lot, is that they're not recruiting everybody to start. They're recruiting you to be part of a roster, and that piece of it. And I think it's pretty easy to tell how a college coach values you if you really sit back and are honest with yourself, like we talked about earlier, and you'll be able to tell, like, okay, how much does this college coach value me? And it's not always monetary, right? Sometimes it's, okay, do you not hear from a coach for a year? And then all of a sudden it's fall of senior year and they're all about you and can't wait to get you on campus. And it's that piece of it. Okay, well, did somebody else say no? What happened where suddenly that coach is all about you? And are they all about you because they want you to come in and fill, maybe a kid transferred out or a kid graduated early, or are they all about you because suddenly they need an extra kid on the roster? Which again, just isn't a fun conversation to have, but it's important to have as a family and really sit down and figure out, what is my experience going to look like?
Yeah.
Don't,
I think
don't
that's
you
super
think,
important.
don't you think it's okay? Like, okay, so say your senior year, a coach does give you a lot of attention. Great. If it's a place you want to go and honestly that this is why they're doing it, because maybe two other people backed out, it could be your ticket into the game. But I think you need to be honest and know that it's going to be an uphill battle when you go
Yeah.
there, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So many,
Yeah.
so many people don't. Again, oh, the shortstop's graduating. I'm a shortstop. Like that's not how it
Yeah.
works.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think having those conversations with coaches is okay too.
Yep.
And saying, hey, where do you project me being part of your program? What are the things I would need to work on to start for you as a freshman? And if that laundry list is 18 things, you're probably not starting as a freshman. Like,
Yeah.
because coaches want kids that understand their role and really embrace that role. And I look at some kids, and I've got a kid that she had offers from all three divisions, and she didn't commit to a D1 school until almost November of senior year. And it's the perfect fit for her. It's exactly where she was supposed to be. Like, and that's not the norm though. So I don't sit here and say, oh, like you can still play D1 if you're uncommitted November of senior year. Can you? Yes. Is that the exception? Yes.
Yeah.
And I tell families all the time, I'm like, plan like you're the rule and plan like you're like everybody else. And then if you end up being the exception, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. I
I
think I
no
was
go
just
go
gonna say
ahead.
too, I think it's important to watch that team play or where you're going, and then you can really see what the coach values by who they're putting on the field. Is it the athletic kids? Is it the power kids? Is it all their swings look the same? So mine's gonna have to be like that to take the field. You can just kind of see maybe some sort of trend of that's what I need to get to be a starter on this team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are very few kids now who understand the work it actually takes to start in college at any level.
Mhm.
And I have junior college friends that are winning championships consistently, and those kids are working just as hard as upper division kids or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. I think what's surprising to me, no matter what the recruit is, I still think college coaches really don't know how the player is going to be when they get there.
Mhm.
And I noticed it, listen, just through the lens of my two girls playing, all the kids that came and went within the 4 years they're playing softball. So to be consistent and have discipline and a work ethic is probably the biggest skill you could take into biggest trait characteristic you could take into college regardless of your talent level, and you might be surprised senior year what you're doing because they drop like flies and this person comes in and then you have injuries and grades. There's so many variables, but that was surprising because everybody goes in already painting their story of what's going to happen, right? And I couldn't believe that. And I'm guessing I just see it through the lens of those two programs, but I'm guessing it's that way everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the transfer portal, I could talk about the transfer portal forever.
I was gonna ask
That
you
was my
about
next,
that.
that was
So
my next question too.
It's the transfer portal has changed the game. And like I had Jasmine Hall, who plays for JMU, on my podcast a little bit ago, and she was talking about her freshman year experience. She went into preseason not playing. She was recruited as a shortstop, was getting like backup reps at second base, and their starting second baseman had an off weekend. So she got an opportunity. She hit pretty well. So they gave her a couple more pinch hits. She continued to hit well, ended up taking that upperclassman spot as a freshman, and then transferring over to shortstop as a sophomore, and was their starting shortstop as a sophomore there. But if she had decided during preseason, like, oh, well, this sucks, I'm not playing, this is ridiculous, like, I should be playing, they recruited me and transferred, she's not their starting shortstop as a sophomore. And who knows, because she's basically redoing her whole freshman year, trying to learn a new program and a new coaching staff and all of that at, hopefully a new home, because most kids aren't finding a new home these days either. So there's that
Do
piece
you
of
have
it too.
do you have statistics with that? Like, are there statistics out there? How many kids enter the transfer portal? How many actually get picked up?
So there are a lot of stats out there. I haven't seen the NCAA come out with anything.
Okay.
Everything I've found has said that just about 40% of kids that go into the portal don't find a home.
So,
That's kind of the going consensus right now, is that about 40% of the kids that go in. And the thing I like to talk about with the transfer portal that nobody else likes to talk about is the money piece, because transfers do not get academic money. Like, you go in as a freshman at a private institution and you might get $20,000-$30,000, and they might get you down to what a state school would be. Transfer money is usually less than $10,000 academically. So, all these families are like, oh, well, I'll just transfer and there'll be athletic money and I'll figure it out. Well, most kids are on more academic money anyways to begin with.
yeah.
And if there's not the same academic money offered for transfers, a lot of kids end up almost paying for an extra year of school, whether they go to school for an extra year or not, because they just get less scholarship money. So yeah, the transfer portal is a little crazy.
I think that's why it's so important to do what you do and have conversations like this, because I think the transfer portal is good in certain cases, right, for people who really just didn't find the right fit and want to try to adjust that. But some of it is you're afraid of the hard work that's going to come with it, which, if you're honest with yourself from the start, maybe could have been avoided, right? So some of that piece of it, but I think too, it's just, yeah, I could talk about it forever too, but
I think it's interesting too, because like that's pretty much like that was like the topic of conversation all summer that I was out with college coaches too. And I have a close friend, she lost 8 to the portal this year. And I was like, hey, like what, and she's like, oh my gosh, everybody's asking me. And she was like, 3 of them were ineligible, 3 of them were never going to play for me and were a problem. One of them changed their major and the other kid wanted to go back home. So she was like, yes, I lost 8, but most of them were addition by subtraction.
Right.
They're those kids that were bringing the culture down. They're the kids that weren't an academic fit anymore, and I think that's what we're seeing. Like, a lot of coaches are very wary of going into the portal unless they have to, because portal kids usually are causing problems at their first school, and that's why they're in the portal.
That's a great point. So it almost makes it easier on coaches if they leave for the right reasons. Because what we see on the news is when ESPN picks up said player from Oregon, goes in the portal, and I was at Texas. That's not what's happening.
Right.
And I guarantee you that conversation already took place before the whole portal thing opened.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I always ask people, I'm like, are you the 1% or are you the 99%?
Yeah.
Like, which demographic do you fall in? Because we only see the 1% on social media usually. Like, we're not seeing what the 99% deals with the portal.
You go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that's why your whole journey is so important, just making right decisions through it all. Because let's say you go to that first school, then you want to transfer. A lot of these coaches know each other, so they're gonna know the interaction that you had with them before you committed, and what were you like at this school? Like, you don't think that new coach is gonna call your old coach sometimes and ask about you? I just think a lot of girls don't realize how small the softball world can really be and how much interaction college coaches like truly have with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely interesting, like the level of research college coaches do on kids. I get calls all the time from college coach friends about kids that they know are from my area that don't even work with me. And they're like, hey, I know you know the area. What do you know about these parents? What do you know about this kid? Like, what are they like in school? And they're not even kids that work with me. but they just know, okay, you're in Central PA, you're from New York, you know all these people. I get asked a lot too. So, like, for example, I didn't go to Colorado this year and I did two local tournaments instead. And some of my friends who went to Colorado were like, hey, if you get an off game, can you go watch this kid for me? So I'm at a game watching a kid. The kid has no idea who I am. They're thinking, oh, the coach I want to play for is in Colorado. Like, I can do whatever. It doesn't matter. And then there's little old me behind the backstop taking notes in my phone to send to a coach friend. And the kid has no idea that that interaction even occurred. And whether it's travel ball coaches, high school coaches, like college coaches rely on the people they trust and the people they know are doing it for the right reasons. And like those conversations happen way more now, especially because post COVID, a lot of those recruiting budgets didn't come back the way they needed to. And even with inflation, like coaches can't afford to be out and recruiting and interacting with kids as much. So they have to rely on their network more.
So I was going to ask a couple questions about clients in your business, but when you talked about Colorado, I want to talk about that. I feel like in travel ball, people think they have to travel to go get recruited. That's not true. But just for the scenario you said, but I feel there's also a side of it. You have to travel at some point to see how you compare on the national stage. Does that make sense? I feel like I feel like people sometimes do it for the wrong reasons. What are your thoughts on that? I think it's good, but I think it has to be for the right reasons.
Yes, I think it totally depends on the kid and the family. I have freshmen and sophomores right now that are already only targeting D2, D3 schools because that's what they want for their experience. They're like, I want to target D2, D3 schools. I want to be within 3 hours from home. This is what I want to major. This is where I'm at. Those kids don't need to be traveling nationally. You know, I can look at a roster that I'm thinking of right now, and the college coach has 5 incoming kids to a D3 school. 3 of them did the national travel ball circuit, did all that. 2 of them did not, and they're all at the same D3 school.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we join these national teams that most of them really aren't national teams to begin with, but that's a whole nother podcast. And they're saying, oh, we're spending all this money, we're traveling, we're doing this, like we're chasing a dream. And then those parents expect that scholarship reimbursement on the other end. And then what if they don't get it? I think my biggest advice when it comes to travel ball and traveling is do it because you love it and because you're using it as family vacations and don't expect a scholarship on the other end.
Yeah.
Like if you invest all this money in travel ball and never see it back, that should be okay. And then if you get the scholarship on the other end, it's like the cherry on top.
It's funny you say that because we talk about it. I mean, my wife and we miss, I mean, they're older now. Their bodies probably don't miss the travel, right? I mean, you think about it in college, you're playing like 4 or 5 games in a day potentially. And then in college, you play 2 games and you're gassed, right?
Yeah.
But we miss it because we love that. The relationships, the people, the places we went to. I mean, Ellie could tell you off camera in secret. I don't think that's why we did it, but that was our story, right?
Yeah.
I think you get angry and jaded if you start thinking it's because I want to go to Alabama or I want to go to USC or whatever.
Right.
But
Yeah,
it's hard to convince people of that. That's all. That's why I brought it up.
it is. Yeah. And so, I mean, we work with kids. I worked with a kid that didn't even play travel ball, all the way up to the kid that's flying every single weekend, doing the national schedule, all the crazy. And so much of it is, and all these people are like, here's a blueprint. Here's how you get recruited. Like, this is how to do it. I'm like, that's not how this works.
There's no such thing.
Like, there's literally no such thing. And like, it's so dependent on not only you as an athlete, but also your family, because there are things that are more important than softball.
Yeah.
And nobody likes to have that conversation.
There should be. Yeah.
Right. And like I have some families where they're like, we would love to do the national showcase schedule, but we've got 3 other kids and we're not doing that to our 3 other kids. And we're gonna play regionally and we're gonna do what we can. And at the end of the day, I did it. I had one of my little interns, he was not thrilled. But so he went through every single postseason team for all 3 divisions and all of their rosters and took data on where all the kids were from. And like 70% of kids are from in region. So
we talked about that.
Yes, I think in a tournament.
I heard that one year at a coaches conference, and it blows your mind. It blows your mind, but it's true.
I'm a big believer that if you play the top regional showcases, you do not have to play nationally. And I never played in Colorado. My sister did, but I didn't. I
Right.
never played out. I think I played at the Disney tournament once in my high
Yeah.
school career and played in college and, lefty pitcher. So obviously I was a little bit of a unicorn, but, got a good scholarship and, I played regionally the whole time and went to Florida once. And it's doable if you're doing your job as an athlete in a family and connecting with coaches.
Right.
Like we
Yeah.
see so many families who are like, oh, we're traveling nationally. Like my travel ball coach has all these connections. It's amazing. I don't have to do anything. And then those are the families that end up in trouble later down the line because they're just expecting somebody else to get them recruited. And then they don't find the right home or they end up transferring because their travel ball coach just said, oh, go to this school. I have a connection there versus
Right.
really helping the athlete find the fit for them.
Yeah.
Only, I think last I checked, under 50% of my kids are playing at a school with a coach that I had a connection with before they committed there.
Wow.
Oh,
Because I don't want my kids to use my connections. I
right.
I
like
like
if they
that.
can use them and help, that's great. But like I want to help you market yourself and connect with coaches yourself. And how do we go through this process the right way versus you just going to a school that I have a great connection with?
Yeah.
I
That's right.
have I have two more questions as we wrap this up. So Allie, as I ask them, if you think of anything.
Oh, I got one too. Don't-
Yeah, well, we'll alternate then.
Yeah.
Quincy, so with your clients, do you ever, I mean, I guess I can ask this, do you ever lose clients? Because you seem pretty honest and you seem to have good perspective and in their best interest, but they might not see it that way. Do you ever lose people?
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. And I think that's part of why I'm putting out a lot more content into the world and with the podcast. And because I want people to kind of buy into that experience over division philosophy. Like if there are people that are like only chasing D1 and, they're not necessarily my kind of people. Like I love our D1 athletes. I am just as proud of them. I think that's amazing. But I want that to be the right fit for them, not just because they're chasing Division 1 to be a number on a roster.
Yeah.
I work with about a couple of kids every class that say they want to play in college, but they don't really know what that means.
Yep.
And then they end up just deciding that playing in college isn't for them. I think that's where I lose probably the most kids
Okay. And that's
is
okay.
right. They go through the process and realize like this isn't what I thought it was. And then, that piece of it, I have an athlete that ended up deciding senior year she wanted to be a nurse and decided not to play so that she could go to nursing school at a bigger institution where she
Okay.
couldn't play softball
Yeah.
for 4 years.
For her.
Yeah.
Which it's totally possible to do nursing and play softball at the same time for 4 years, but not at the school she wanted to do it at.
Yeah.
And that piece of it. So I think it really depends on the family. It's part of my business model is I charge monthly and families are allowed to drop the program because I believe in that. Like whether you decide not to play or, your situation changes and you don't need to work with me anymore. Like I'm very much like work with me for what you need. And if your path changes, like I'm super excited for you and go do amazing things.
Yeah. That's really important. And actually my question, that's a great segue into that. So good job, Dad. So I know you've talked a little bit about, right, kids thinking they want to play and then maybe taking a different path. But I guess on the flip side, what age do you think a kid should know pretty well if they want to play in college? Because what I see is you're a freshman and I ask you, hey, do you want to play? I don't know. Okay, well, if you decide to flip that switch to yes, your junior year, now it's going to be a little bit tricky. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that because I also don't think you need to know in fifth grade that you want to play.
Yes. And fifth graders all want to play at UCLA or Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
which is not the norm.
Yeah.
I think in
I know
I
it's
think
tough.
if it's so hard. If
Yeah.
you're a parent of a middle schooler who is pretty good, pretty dedicated, thinks they want to play in college, it's time to start having some different conversations without diving fully into it. I personally love to start with kids when they start high school because then we just make a plan. Like we never have to follow back, follow up, undo. Like it's just okay. I'm in high school. We're moving forward. From the college coach perspective, most D1, D2 coaches are really starting to evaluate kids based on talent at the beginning of sophomore year.
Yeah.
So like they might look at you freshman year and go, okay, this kid's athletic. She looks like a great teammate. I'm going to continue to follow her. But they're not really looking at the nitty gritties yet. But with that being said, like I accept kids into our program all the way through September of senior year.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
we had a couple of 2025s that last minute were like, I didn't think I wanted to play. Like, I think I have a chance if I can play at these schools, or they become more realistic and they're like, okay, well, I wanted to play at this D1 school. That doesn't make sense, so I'm not going to play. And then as they get closer to graduating and realizing it's going to be over, they're like, okay,
Yeah.
maybe I do want to play. Um,
Yeah. I
so
think
yeah,
it goes back to just being honest with yourself because what I see sometimes is girls say, I don't know if I want to play, but I want to go to a big school. Okay, well, one of those things might have to give, right? So that's why I think early on it's important to have parents who ask you those questions. Again, who you surround yourself with, or ask yourself those questions. Like, okay, if I want those two things to align, right, maybe I need to reevaluate what I'm thinking.
absolutely. And I think those conversations like between parents and kids, like we see a lot of times I'll see, and I do this sometimes too, and have to stop myself of like, oh, like I can't believe that kid's only going to this school. Or, oh, I don't think that kid's gonna play there. Like I'm shocked she committed there. And like kids are hearing those things.
Yeah.
I had an athlete who about a year ago, she and I like grabbed, I was like, hey, what's going on? Like, let's go grab lunch. Like, let's just talk about this. And she goes, I am so scared to not commit Division 1 because I don't think my parents are going to help me pay for school if I don't play Division 1. And then like the parents were like mortified that she thought that. They were shocked. But because of the way they were speaking about other athletes, she just assumed like, oh, they only care about me playing Division 1, and the
Um,
parents didn't even realize that that was like what their kid was hearing. So I think as parents, it's so important to like, if it's not your kid, don't speak about their process.
mhm.
Like you don't know the ins and outs of that kid on your team just committed. You have no idea the other school she was looking at, the other conversation she was having, why she chose that school. One of our 2023s, yeah, 2023s last year was a finalist for D3 National Player of the Year.
That's
And the
awesome.
first conversation a parent had with me about it locally was, well, I knew she could have played Division 1. It wasn't, oh my gosh, she's a finalist for D3 Player of the Year. And in my head, I'm like, if she had played Division 1, she would have been a pinch runner and probably not played her whole 4 years. And instead, she's having this amazing experience and is
Yeah.
getting nationally recognized at D3.
Yeah.
And like those conversations as you're younger matter, and then
Mhm.
really figuring it out. I think sophomore year is kind of make or break for kids.
Yeah.
And a lot of parents will say to me like, well, we're not going to focus on connecting with college coaches until we can talk to them at the end of sophomore, beginning of junior year anyways. Like, but they're already evaluating you. And if they
Yeah.
don't know you exist, you don't get a call on June 15th or September 1st because they don't know who you are.
Mhm.
And it's really that prep work that pays off a year or 2 years later that our society today doesn't like. We want to know tomorrow what the plan is, who
Yeah.
likes me, what's going on. And
Instant
it's really
gratification.
playing the long game, right?
So this is another great segue. Thank you, Allie. So last
Anytime.
question. Quincy, is your clientele local? Is it national? In theory, could anybody work with you? And tell us how people can find you on social media.
Yeah. So I'm a Northeast girl. This is where I grew up and did most of my college coaching. So I work with mostly Northeast, Mid Atlantic families just because that's where my college coach connections are. I do work with a lot of athletes out of region that want to come to the Northeast as well. So right now we've got California kids, Oregon kids, that are more looking to come this way, who need a little bit more of that like foot in the door so coaches kind of believe them
I
that they
never
really
thought
are
of
going to
that.
get across.
That's an interesting perspective. Like I never thought that people want to work with you for that reason,
Mhm.
but it
Yep.
makes sense when you say it.
So I work with a lot of kids out of region that want high academic because all of your high academic schools are usually in the Northeast minus a couple. So that's kind of where my out of region families come from. But I do almost everything virtually on the phone, and then obviously out at tournaments and things like that as well. So yeah, and
Well,
then
where can they find you? You're not
yeah,
telling us.
everywhere. No, I'm kidding.
She's
The
always
easiest
watching, like she said at that one game. No.
the easiest place to connect with me is probably Instagram, which is just Diamond Dynamics SV. And I can shoot you some other website links and things like that as well, if you want to throw them in the show notes.
Yeah, please do. I'll do that. And thank you so much. We went over, which I knew we would.
Yeah, of
It's
course.
it's just the way it goes, and that's
No,
okay.
this
But
was great. Absolutely.
well,
And I hope people are listening to this in the car on the way to their next tournament
Yeah.
because this is a perfect one for that.
I
Yeah.
agree. And thanks so much. And keep doing the work because it's easy to get lost in the process.
Yeah.
And that's not how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a process that helps you find your best self in your future. So keep it
It
up.
truly does pay off. So
Yeah. And it's a really long 4 years if you're not enjoying it either.
Oh
Like if
yeah,
yeah,
you're not enjoying the process to get to college, you're probably not going to enjoy it once you get to college anyways. So,
yeah, very
absolutely
true.
not. Well, thanks so much,
Awesome.
Quincy.
absolutely. Thanks so much.
Yeah, talk
Bye.
soon.